Hey, Michal.
Hi Artur, how are you?
I'm good. I just finished reading your blog post, and I think that will be our main topic for today's discussion. You said that mode in AI isn't your agent, isn't your model, but it's rather how fast you can find the bugs and how fast you can and precisely can catch the failures of models and AI before your customers do. Why is
So we often think about USPs and moats and what is the value that a product brings versus some competitor. So that was the title of the blog post, which is your moat is in your model or your agent. I don't even remember. The moat in that post is your evals. The main insight or the main thought there is that once you have evals, you can operate in this eval-driven development kind of mindset where you experiment, iterate, change potentially fast and learn a lot, but without risk. Because of course, I mean, you want to fly fast, but you also don't want to fly blind. And evals are, in my opinion, as crucial as unit tests or integration tests, which allow you to again deploy your software with trust.
Okay. So we're talking most to the business audience. So if you can describe business friendly terms, what is eval? Why it's essential for brands using AI today? Because from my understanding, like this is the only way to get your AI to production. Without this, you're just going blind. But how do you do them? What they are? What are the examples?
So evals actually is the way to, it's like a crash test before you go to production. You want to expose failures and you want to assess the performance of your AI based systems before your customers do. Yeah, you want to catch a crisis before your user will catch them. I would say that this is like a car crash test that allows you to see the performance of your application and make sure that it behaves as you want it to behave. And some examples, imagine that you have a chatbot that is expected to have certain tone. Maybe it's a friendly tone, maybe it's a professional tone, but you want it to resonate with your brand, with your branding. And how do you measure that and how you make sure that the chatbot does that through evals is exactly that. Or maybe you want to make sure that your again chatbot knows when to escalate to a human customer
Okay, so
service
so let's
person.
ma- so let's make an example of customer support automation, and let's say we have a scenario that agent decides based on the what somebody's doing an email to the customer support agent, and agent decides that it's gonna make this refund, whereas somebody then finds, hey, we shouldn't do this refund because this was above $200 and it should be investigated by the people. How would you design evil around that?
So the first thing, and actually this is not really only about AI systems, but also about humans. I mean, first you need to know what does it mean expected behavior, as in like, if you have a customer service representative, how do they know what to do? Do they have some guidelines, maybe some knowledge in written documents? And so this would be a starting point, I would say. Again, I mean, we can go into detail, but just to establish what is the expected behavior.
Let's say in this case, everything that goes beyond $200 need to go to the supervisor and cannot be automatically refunded. This is in my policy as a customer agent.
So you would probably want to deploy two things. First is some way to do it in a continuous way even before you hit production. So you would have an evaluation data set where you have certain tests, certain evals that can include this specific case, and you can measure how often your system behaves in a way that you expect, or maybe you want to check, let's say you want to migrate to a new model, or maybe you want to change something about your system. How does that affect your metric, which is in this case, hey, how often do we let this unwanted situation to occur? Of course, I would expect the target to be zero, but these are probabilistic systems, so maybe you can't go to a complete zero. But basically, you would have an ongoing evaluation process where you test against that and probably against some other things that you care about. But also, you should also have some guardrails on production to flag if those situations occur and, of course, act on that as well.
And if they occur and somebody spotted this when you're already on production, what can you do about it? And how eval helps you to improve your model when you catch this case? You said you give some kind of a feedback, right? And then what happens underneath?
Well, I
Why
mean,
people should constantly feedback the AI that is put on front of
so
the
I,
customer?
I would say this because we are having a very like toy example here. We're kind of saying that actually we already know what shouldn't happen, and then we also kind of say, hey, this actually happened on production, which again is, I would say, not a typical scenario. Yeah, what typically happens is that you already have your evals, you already are measuring certain things, and you are confident about the performance of the system. Again, sometimes it's not 100%, but it's 80%, whatever, but you're willing to take certain trade-offs. And then you discover a new situation that maybe you did not think about earlier. Yeah, maybe the problem that you have now on production is something that you just missed in those evals. So here, of course, you should think about first how to improve your system, as in like your prompts. Maybe you should include some examples. Maybe again, I mean, there is a whole domain of prompt engineering and what you can do to address that. But from the eval perspective, that basically uncovers that you have a gap in your evals, just like you have a gap in your unit tests. If you suddenly have a bug, or those with strong kind of test-driven development, or generally like those who appreciate tests in their software, probably one of the first things they do when there is a bug report, hey, we need to have a test that guards against this bug even before we actually fix that bug. And this is how I like to think about evals. I mean, okay, we found something that's critical. What can we do to actually systematically guard against this situation? How to improve our eval data set? And actually, this example is very interesting because by presenting the situation, you kind of start with what user sees, what customer sees, or what potential impact it has on your user journey, rather than some abstract metrics, which is a great way to think about it. I mean, there are some off-the-shelf frameworks that come with some standardized eval metrics, which might be useful, but it's actually much better to just start with what is the behavior you expect and what is the problem that you will face if you don't deploy certain thing, and go from there to the metric that you can actually then see on some dashboard.
Okay. So from what you're saying, by anticipating first before you go to production, and you avoid the situation that we had from these airlines that were giving $0 flights, right? And everybody was laughing about them.
Or there are so many examples of this, like bots selling a car with a 90% discount, or
Exactly.
legal copilot hallucinating some regulations. I mean, LLMs are very good at sounding confident while bullshitting at the same time. So, and evils just kind of guard us against.
Okay. And then it means that you need to do it yourself. There's no way that somebody just will give you off-the-shelf evals data set. You need to, every single company needs to figure out their own evals because they have their own policy, their own rules, their own expected behaviors. And in enterprises, there is a lot of edge cases that are just not known from the outside world.
Yes. I mean, there is I agree that this is. I agree that evals are hard, basically. That's why I do it. As I told you the other day, I think they're useful, hard, and boring. A perfect combination to, get into something and do something if you find this interesting. It's hard to just take some off-the-shelf solution and like turn it into an eval framework that will work, because there are so many things specific to your domain. But at the same time, I also want to make a point that to start with evals, you don't require a lot of investment and effort upfront. Yeah, you can start small. You can use synthetic data, you can just cover some basic things and come up with some simple metrics. But having something and basically starting now is again very important to not flying blind and developing these systems in a predictable and reliable way.
I think to the point that they're boring, I think we all can agree because it just requires, from my experience, it just requires back and forth with different business users, like with legal, with commercial team, with marketing, with compliance. You need to go back and forth and collect this information from them, and you need to organize a lot of the internal knowledge and create a lot of synthetic data to simulate the user scenarios. So it is boring, it is time consuming, but I think it's totally worth it. But what is hard about evals? Apart from, let's say, two perspectives. First, what is hard from a technical point of view? And two, what is hard from like organizational change management point of view?
So you've already touched on one aspect. One reason why this is hard is that evals often require domain knowledge and like understanding of where you're operating, the domain you're operating in, and like what actually matters. Stakeholders are important part of this equation. I would say evals are also difficult because you just have to be good at also at the data, as in like, you know, there is you can't do evals without looking at the data, without looking at some failure modes, without doing some stats. I actually have, apart from computer science, I have sociology background, quantitative sociology, and there is like a whole subfield of sociology about how to ask questions to people to understand certain things. Like imagine that you want to understand how people do shopping, and this is like a broad concept. How do you actually then turn it into simple questions that allow you to understand this? And it's a very similar problem here. Like we have some generic understanding of our domain and the expected behavior, but what does it mean in terms of the specific behaviors of the model? How to check this? How to construct good metrics around it? It's a complex thing, and again, it kind of requires domain knowledge, data understanding. You also know you should be able to then present certain data, you know, data science skills. Yeah. But there is also another layer of it, which is that those models are probabilistic, and it's not like you find something and, you know, you can just add, I don't know, a branch in your code and okay, we are covered. No, I mean, things will happen, and they happen with certain probability, and you have to have it in mind when designing these systems.
Okay.
These evals, basically, not only system, but also evals that are guarding against problems.
Okay. So I think it's gonna take quite a long time till market understands what we're discussing in here is still pretty new, I would say. But for the people who never did it, let's say you're a head of ecom or like chief digital, and uh you took some SaaS solution, your team from marketing is saying like this chatbot is not behaving the way we expect,
Mhm.
or you bought agent force and you gave some prompts, you connected this to your salesforce data, and people are saying this is not what we want from it. Like how would you start with evals today with a minimal budget just to test like whether it's improving the accuracy and you're like more confident to put this solution on production?
Yeah, so as I was saying before, I advise to start small, but start now. As in, you know, you don't need to overthink it. You can start with something very, very small and build from that. What I would implement on day one are at least three things. First is some observability tools. And this is a technical term, but basically, you know, a way to capture whatever your models are doing, your tools are doing in a systematic way so that you can inspect it. Maybe you can use it for building future evals. Yeah, so that doesn't require anything. You can use tools like LangFuse that gives you a source of data that you can potentially leverage.
It's like the basic hygiene. Without it,
Exactly,
you're
exactly. Yeah,
just
I mean,
running blind.
this is pretty much zero effort because you can plug these tools, and again, it doesn't necessarily give you immediate value. So maybe somebody could question that, well, why you're bringing this up in the conversation about evals and how to start. But my point is that when you start collecting this, you will quickly be able to leverage this as a data source and plug it into the evals that you will actually need. Yeah. So that's hygiene, but very useful hygiene. Then if you are building a rack system, for example, there is a component where you are injecting documents from certain sources into your context. This is something that doesn't require a lot of effort, and I would say should be evaluated on day one as well. So using and actually many of the concepts from recommender systems. I mean, we are talking in the context of e-commerce, so I'm sure at least some of the audience will be familiar with this, like recall or MRR. These are things that you use to assess performance of recommender systems, and you can use the similar approach to assess how good you are in injecting relevant content in your context. Yeah, this would be the second thing, because it's very easy to deploy. As in it's much easier to evaluate that than if your bot is doing the right job. Yeah, it's like here it's a very specific problem. And third thing I would advise.
What you're saying is to pick quite of a deterministic process that you're doing. So, for
Yeah,
example,
if you have
like,
RAG, if you have
Mhm.
RAG, that's I would say this is a no-brainer that you want to have evals around that. And actually, no matter if you have RAG or not, I'm sure you will be able to start on day one leveraging synthetic data. So
how I think about it is you define that in a specific case, let's say somebody is asking about the product details, your rule is that agents should go to the internal document and use the retrieval to get this information instead of making this up from his general knowledge, right? So you can do, for example, an eval that is saying 0, 1, whether it called the internal database or not. Is it something you had in mind?
this is actually it's actually very easy to do when you actually work with synthetic data. Imagine that you have a database and of documents potentially, yeah, like let's say 50 documents, and then you pick a document, a single document out of this database, and you come up with questions that are relevant for this document. So you start from the document and then come up with what your users could ask for to make this document relevant. And you repeat this process, and as an end result, you actually have a data set which has a potential user query and a list of documents that are relevant to that query. And once you have that, and again, because you can use LLMs to create this data set, of course, the more connected this is to your domain, and like, there are ways to actually make it relevant, are actually quite challenging. Even the simple data set, but with leveraging large language models for the synthetic data gives you basically a data set where you have a potential user queries and what is relevant, and that's enough to actually have things like MRR in this setup. Does it make
Okay.
sense?
Yes, I think it's pretty important to flag that large language models, they have already really intense knowledge about different domains. So let's say you're a sports shoe producer, and if you're like Nike, then model would know all about your products, all about your commercials, because it's been trained on your data as well, right? And if you're selling Nike in your specific, let's say, sports store, where you're advising people on how to run, you would rather want to give your expert advice and you're somehow position yourself that you have something more than the general knowledge rather than the model itself, right? So it will be different because if you don't put a great effort into making sure that your agent is answering the way that you would do it offsite or like at the offline store, then it will come up with totally random answers that are coming from the data it was trained on. So doing evals on this, what we're discussing here, makes sure that you answer the way you would like your clerks to respond, right? From the beauty industry, let's say there are retinoids. Are the retinoids good for acne? If you ask ChatGPT, it would say yes, retinoids are good for acne because it's true. It's been all over the internet. But if your specific retinoids are not tested for acne and you cannot say that for this medical condition this is a great answer, then you should have other way around, right? So you should say, well, basically, in general, retinoids can help with acne, but this product is not made for targeting this specific skin condition, right? So something like this.
Yeah, you usually have some sort of knowledge, documents, data sources that you want to include into the model knowledge, let's say, which basically inject into the context, so that whatever model says takes into account this knowledge. And the key problem here is that you don't want to throw there everything you have in your company. You want to be specific, not to pollute with knowledge which is not relevant. And again, the simple eval that I was referring earlier, how to measure if we're providing the model the relevant documents, is exactly for that. This pattern is very common across different AI or LLM-based systems. So this is why I'm mentioning this. Yeah, it's probably, if you are working with LLMs, most likely you will be incorporating your knowledge into your prompt in one way or another, and what to incorporate, how to do it, and how to measure if you're doing it right or wrong. It's quite important.
So maybe like last question from my side, because the market of AI tools and models will look totally different. I wanted to touch on the mode side, like given all the knowledge that you just presented about evals, if you can just paraphrase why AI is not a mode, why using the specific agent that you've built today is not giving you a competitive advantage in the long run.
I mean, everybody can take an off-the-shelf model, a foundational model, and build something around that. You have to build more on top of that. I'm not saying that evals are the only mode that you can have, of course, but I definitely think that those companies who treat it seriously, and what I mean by that is what we discussed at the beginning, where you actually have a systematic way to do it. You do it in a continuous way. It's not an afterthought. It's not like a Q&A that happens like at the last day. The Q&A can be compared to like vibe checks. Yeah, okay, does it look good? It's not what we are talking about. I see evals as a mode in the sense that this can be like part of your product infrastructure. Yeah, like if you have reliable tests and do it in a continuous way, you can experiment fast and again, be confident that whatever you do, if you want to change from one model to another, or if you want to add a new feature, or maybe add some new tool to your agent or some new behavior to your agent, there are a lot of things you can do, and a lot of things that you can break potentially. So if you have kind of a safety net, which evals are, you can just do it faster, and you can be confident that you are not breaking anything.
Okay, but I would say like because so evals and your custom data set is what's gonna stay with you, and the framework that you're using today and the models that you're using today probably won't last. Like if you've built something on GPT-4o, you probably moved on to GPT-4o mini already, and it behaves a bit differently. So you need to be able to track the differences. And that's the same with people were building on just on the other perspective. People were crazy about LangChain, but then it hit the wall, and even LangChain said, "Let's go to LangGraph." So we switched the whole infrastructure. Then OpenAI released Agents SDK, and instead of building something in your custom code, you're using Agents SDK. So it's gonna change a lot, right? Both models and the frameworks you're building your agents with, but the data set, it stays with you, and it's gonna be your competitive advantage because you'll be moving faster despite any change on the market.
Yes, exactly. And it's not even only the data set, it's how you think what's important, how you measure it. And again, the models change. You want to experiment with different vendors, but if you just do it and just look at whatever you are looking at and say, yeah, it kind of looks okay, let's do it, you're just exposing yourself to risks.
I think it's the same when it comes to switching from OpenAI to Gemini. You would like to do some part of the task with Anthropic models. Without this, you just don't know what to do, right? And whether it's because when you improve something on one end of your application, it doesn't mean that you haven't failed something at the beginning of the flow.
Yeah, and as we said, I mean, evals are hard, partly also because those systems are hard. There are lots of moving parts. They are probabilistic. They are very surprising. I mean, again, because I've worked on systems where we have evals, we actually saw some behaviors which were very surprising. One thing that I'm absolutely confident is that you should think about evals in the context of your own business, your own domain, your own problems. If you see an eval on a dashboard, a certain metric, and you don't know what to do to improve it, or what happens to your customer when the metrics drops, it's not a good eval. I mean, you need to start with your customer or user rather than some off-the-shelf metrics.
Okay. Okay. Um, so it's thanks for that. I think it's pretty great advice in the end. Like you need to be an owner of it. You need to know exactly what you're doing, because otherwise, if you outsource this today and you don't build this muscle inside your organization, somebody's coming from the outside without your expertise that you have in your enterprise would probably do a lot of guesswork if they're not experts in the specific domain.
I would say so. I think that this is something that companies will probably, that they are starting to kind of realize this right now, that there is a certain skill set and knowledge that you want to also build internally to make sure that those systems work well. But again, the point that I also want to make is that you don't need a lot of effort and a lot of investment to start. What we discussed earlier, synthetic data, some simple checks, observability tools are usually already enough to give you enough data and enough signal to actually start making informed decisions. Yeah, are we spending money on something that we should spend money on, or maybe there is some cheaper alternative that, according to our metrics, will be equally good?
Yeah, like why would you use O3 model every single time if 4.0 mini is good enough,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and if you are unsure about the switch, that probably you have an evil gap. Basically, you should have some metrics that will give you that.
So it's also not only about accuracy, but seeing those benchmarks. It means that you can confidently do some kind of cost saving without breaking the accuracy that you've built on the higher model.
Yeah, cost saving or just improving something or changing something. For me, one of the key advantages that evals give you is the ability to experiment and iterate faster.
Okay, okay. So, Michal, thanks for this discussion. Tell the audience where they can find you. What do you do for a living?
I do evals for a living, or one of the things that I do these days are evals. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm an AI consultant working with different clients. I also have a website, Przadka.com. I'm not going to spell it. I hope you will be able to link it somewhere. Yeah, and as I said earlier, I realized at some point that evals are very useful, hard, and boring, which is a perfect match for some nerd like me.
Thank you. Thanks for the discussion.
Thank you, Artur.
Cheers.
Bye.